Here, Islam is venerating Jesus as the Messiah. I'm pretty sure most Christians don't realize that. Why have I never heard of this before? All right, welcome back to the channel where we are reading the Quran for the first time from an agnostic perspective. So we are in chapter 3 of the Quran titled Family of Imran. It's a really interesting chapter, so let's just dive right into it. In the beginning of chapter 3, it's basically talking again about those who believe in the monotheistic concept of God will be saved, and those who disbelieve will be cast into the fire, right? The really interesting part of the chapter starts around verse 33 when it starts introducing the family of Imran, which I had never really heard of this figure before myself, growing up with a Christian background. And it's saying, God chose Adam and Noah and the family of Abraham and the family of Imran over all mankind, right? It's, talking about how basically the wife of Imran is the one who's the mother of Mary, right? Who ends up, being the mother of Jesus. And it's talking about, it mentions Zachariah, the father of John the Baptist, right? Here the Quran is basically retelling the story of Jesus, talking about how Jesus is born of Mary through like a virgin birth, right? Immaculate conception. Basically, God just makes it so, right? This reference to Jesus, right? As the Messiah, right? It's calling him right here in verse 45. O Mary, God gives you good news of a word from him. His name is the Messiah, Jesus, son of Mary, well esteemed in this world and the next, and one of the nearest, right? Like, is Islam a form of Christianity? Here, Islam is venerating Jesus as the Messiah. And, I've never known this before. I've always just considered Islam to be a completely different religion, right? I knew that it was an offshoot of the Abrahamic religion. I never thought that they considered Jesus to be the Messiah. Because if they do, then it seems like they would be a form of Christianity in some sense, right? I'm pretty sure most Christians don't realize that, right? Here it is in verse 45. His name is the Messiah, Jesus, right? He will speak to people from the crib and in adulthood and be one of the righteous. It even goes on in verse 55 to say, and I will make those who follow you superior, and I will make those who follow you superior to those who disbelieve until the day of resurrection. Right, so it's the Quran is saying people who follow Jesus will be superior to people who don't believe in Jesus. In some sense, the Quran is a testimony of Jesus Christ. Is what it sounds like to me. Or at least that's the way people would frame it nowadays. This type of language would be considered another testimony of Jesus Christ. Islam is considering to be the Messiah. So to me, this is just why have I never heard of this before? I always thought that, like I said, they were two different religions entirely. You know what I mean? I didn't realize. So here it is in verse 65. The Quran again is like, why do you argue about Abraham on the Torah and the Gospel. It seems like the Quran is kind of validating or reaffirming Christianity as well as Judaism, or at least the messages within those scriptures, right? It's validating those scriptures. And this is interesting. It says Abraham was neither a Jew nor a Christian, but he was a monotheist, a Muslim. He was not one of the polytheists. In the Muslim view, Abraham was Muslim, right? So Islam is taking a view that is more universal to the entire narrative, right? I just wonder how much is the Quran going to be relying on those other two books for its own messages. I mean, it's going to have to distinguish itself somehow. So far, I guess that's yet to be seen. It goes on to kind of make this distinction too, where, you know, God wouldn't want you to revere the angels or the prophets as lords. And I think this is another way that distinguishes itself obviously from Christianity, because Christianity, like I said in the first video, is setting up idols before God in some sense. It's like by the claim of, you know, none shall come to the Father yet except through the Son. It's in direct violation to the first three commandments of Moses, right? Put no gods before me. Don't make any idols. And the claim to know God is an act of vanity. So verse 80 makes a lot of sense to me here. God wouldn't command you to take angels or prophets as lords. Would he command you to infidelity after you have submitted? This is a good point. Like, if you have submitted to God, why would he command you to do something perverse? Or, you know, worship an angel as God? Right? Or a prophet as God. The prophets weren't gods themselves. The prophets were supposed to be pointing to a higher concept, not themselves. In verse 84, it's just reiterating, you know, that the Muslims believe in Abraham, Ishmael, Isaac, Jacob, the patriarchs, what was given to Moses and Jesus, the prophets, right? So the thing about this is so do Christians. Christians also believe and you know, follow the teachings of all of those people as well. And a special condemnation, it seems like, for people who, you know, disbelieve and die disbelieving. Right? For those who disbelieve after having believed, they're just going to keep denying anyways, right? So it's like this relationship that people have with the knowledge, if they're going to reject it and be stubborn, or if they're going to basically live or walk with this certain humility of the higher power, right? And acting righteously. Then it gets into this kind of emphasis on the development of community, which is in verse 104. Let there be among you a community called to virtue, and advocating righteousness and deterring from evil. All for this, the best community that ever emerged for humanity. You know, advocating for what is moral, forbid what is immoral, and believe in God, right? This desire to develop community, this righteous community, I think is something that's really kind of a powerful concept. Here it is in verse 130. saying basically condemning usury again. Do not feed on usury compounded over and over, and fear God so that you may prosper, right? This whole thing about compounded over and over is the whole, basically the financial sector that we live in. And in verse 140, it brings up this other interesting point. If a wound afflicts you, a similar wound has afflicted others. Such days we alternate between the people, that God may know those who believe and take martyrs from among you. God does not love the evildoers. If there's this concept of God, like he could be putting us through these similar type of experiences, and people are gonna react differently to the same types of tests, and that's kind of a way for God to, weed out different types of people, I guess. In verse 144, we finally, for the first time, see Muhammad's name in the Quran, right? And it seems like when this was written was in the middle of some sort of battle, because the way it sounds is like we're calling arms to fight alongside Muhammad in the context of this chapter. Like part of me thought that the Quran was going to be more about his life. And so far, we've just heard that he exists and he's a messenger, right? I'm sure we're going to hear more about who Muhammad is and why he's such an important figure in the Muslim faith. But so far, he doesn't seem to be playing a very prominent role, which is a surprise to me. Like I said, Jesus seems to be playing more of a prominent role in the Quran, but we're only in chapter 3 so far, so we'll see how it changes. It brings this point up that you'll be tested through your possessions and your persons, which I think is interesting. You'll be tested through the things that you own, and the people, I guess, that you associate with. They're going to test you. And, basically it's kind of closes out in the chapter reiterating the idea that the believers are going to be rewarded and God's going to take note. If you are dying or working in the service of God, that you're going to be compensated, or I shouldn't say compensated, but that won't go unnoticed, right? And it seems like the Quran again is kind of taking a more universal approach to the concept of monotheism, I think, than Christianity does. At least in the sense of the way I would personally imagine the relationship that God would have with its own creation, right? If I can imagine the relationship that a God would have with its own creation, it's hard to picture that God setting up a scenario where the primary test isn't what's happening within the game that they're playing. Draw the similarity, to like the Squid Game. There's all these different little challenges within the game. And let's say God is the one who produced the game, or, created the games, all of the games within this whole competition that we're all in there for. And imagine if in the midst of all of this, the important thing isn't how well you play the game, but how accurate is your theory on who is producing the games. You see what I'm saying? It's like that's what you're, actually going to be judged on, not by how well you perform within the games, but how how well your guess is on who is producing the actual Squid Game, right? Is it Amazon or is it Netflix? Is it Hulu? You know, and if you guess wrong, or it might even not be one of those three, it might be a different channel entirely. You know, and if you guess wrong, well then that's eternally like then you know, you lose the $1,000,000. You don't get any money. You know, if you guess wrong. To me that doesn't really make sense. Right? It would make more sense for a God to be more concerned about how the people are living within the game, or how are they performing within the games. You know, and if they started thinking too much about what happens after the games and what might happen to them in the other games, then they're missing the point. There's no way for them to be that successful within the games if they're focused too much on what happens after the game. Some people will be saying, oh, you know, this is definitely Amazon Prime producing this show. Other people will be saying, no, we're sure that this is Netflix producing this show, you know. Or other people are thinking, well, we think it's a conglomerate. We don't think that it's one producer. We think it's, you know, crowdsourced by maybe there's 20 different producers bringing forth the games together, and those people are really the bad ones. You know what I mean? Those people are really going to hell. If you think about that, if you have that idea, then you're a polytheist in some sense, right? So if I was the producer of the show, would I punish everyone for coming up with these different theories and just only reward the ones who had at least, you know, at least they were on the right track with Netflix, or, you know, a mono that is just one producer and they were the correct with which one it was. They had the correct idea, you know. Or maybe I'm going to judge them based on whether or not they believe that Undercover Boss showed up, right? Undercover Boss showed up, and you have to believe, you know, the rumor that that one guy who showed up that time was actually Undercover Boss, right? You know, it takes on these absurd types of levels when you think about it like that. Where why would God be doing this? Why would the producer of the show be testing people's ability to guess something correctly, as opposed to judging their performance within the game? And those performance, that rubric could be, yeah, like, you know, how they treated their neighbors, how they, you know, were they like greedy, were they right, charitable. But I can't imagine the most important rubric, the most important measure would being, did they believe in the correct theory about what's going to happen after the game, right? Or the most important, the most correct theory about who is producing the game. It makes more sense to me that the producer of the Squid Game is going to be watching and having compassion for everyone, and kind of seeing how kind of silly it is for them to be fighting over who's producing the game, right? Anyway, I think this has been a pretty good coverage of the chapter 3, the family of Imran in the Quran. And yeah, if you've enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe, comment, help boost the algorithm, and I'll see you in the next video.